Today down in the comments, I want to know who is your favorite slasher. I do not mean what is your favorite slasher movie, I mean who is your favorite slasher character. And while I might be wearing a Jason tank top, I am Team Michael all the way. Hello everyone, I'm Adam C. This is Project Black T-shirt, the channel where we take a look at horror movies of yesterday and today, and then pair them with horror fiction that you will enjoy reading if you like those movies. It's been a little while, over 6 months since I did a Shudder roundup video, and a lot of things has changed with the service, and I really enjoy the service, so I really wanted to do a kind of a big info dump of a bunch of movies that I've enjoyed that are available on Shudder. Now, in my last video like this, Is Shudder Worth It?, I talked about newer films. I focused on newer films for the most part, but for this video, they have a ton of really great archival releases that are mostly only available on like special edition Blu-rays, if they're available at all. So they have a really good catalog, back catalog of older films. So since I wanted to talk about slasher movies, I'm gonna today focus on five movies that are from the era that cemented the slasher film, the 1980s. And then I threw in one kind of more contemporary film just because it ties into what we're talking about today. And I think it's fun, and this is my channel, and you don't get a choice. Now, because streaming services are always changing the movies that they offer, and because I want this video to be like evergreen and to be valuable for a long time, down in the comments, tell me any slasher movies that I missed, anything I didn't talk about that's really good, or anything that they just newly added. Last but not least, if you don't have Shudder but would like to try it, I have a link down in the description. You can use the offer code ADAM to get a free extended 30-day trial. Okay, on with the list. First movie I want to talk about is something they, as of filming this video, they just added. It's Alone in the Dark from 1982, Jack Shoulder's Alone in the Dark. Not to be confused with Uwe Ball's Alone in the Dark, the Tara Reid, Stephen Dorff vehicle. Alone in the Dark is a kind of an odd duck because it is a bigger budgeted slasher with big stars in it. It's got Donald Pleasance, who's clearly no stranger to the genre. It has Martin Landau and Jack Palance. Not really so much a mass slasher kind of picture. It does have a little bit of an odd structure for a slasher movie. Our protagonist is a newly hired psychiatrist who goes to work at this mental institution that's run by Donald Pleasance and kind of has these wackier, kind of more new agey, more touchy-feely rules to it, and the inmates or patients are kind of given pretty much free reign of the asylum, except for the really bad, the violent offender psychopaths that are kept on the 3rd floor. But even their security's kind of lax. And wouldn't you know it, there is a power outage, and these 4 violent psychopaths, led by Jack Palance, who plays a kind of shell-shocked but charismatic veteran, and Martin Landau, his kind of right-hand man, is the preacher, a priest turned arsonist, and they go on this kind of road trip to go. They've convinced themselves, or Jack Palance has convinced them, that the new head psychiatrist must have killed their old psychiatrist that they really liked, so they're going to go, they find his address, and they're going to go terrorize his family. And that's kind of the setup. It takes a little while to get going, but the movie is consistently entertaining, and it has a little bit of this kind of goofy, heightened reality tone to it, but it's never an out-and-out comedy, and it has some kind of, it has colorful characters and kind of its own quirks, and it does feel really polished. Jack Shoulder did The Hidden, which we also talked about on this channel. He's a very polished director. Made some great films in the 80s, and this is one of them. It's a real treat. And this movie's not it's completely out of print on DVD. The DVD, I just looked it up on Amazon, it's like $60-something, and it's out of print, and there is no Blu-ray release of it. So Shudder is really kind of your only option of seeing this movie in anything approaching a good version of it. So that's Alone in the Dark from 1982, very much recommended. This is my first time seeing it because it is kind of so rare and underseen. This was my first time seeing it with Shudder, and it's great. Jumping from something a little less traditional to something a little more traditional, we're going to talk about Night School from 1981. Now this predates Jason's hockey mask, and we kind of use it a little bit in here, kind of like we use it in Alone in the Dark. Pre-icon. Here it's a red herring, making you think you know who the killer is when you don't know who the killer is. But Night School, a killer in a motorcycle outfit and a motorcycle mask in early 1980s, late 1970s kind of Boston. So if you're from the Boston area, if you visited, there's a lot of great location shooting in this film. There is the Faneuil Hall Marketplace, and it has a banner kill takes place in the aquarium, in the Boston Aquarium. So not only do you get some great vintage location shooting and a setting that's a little bit different. It's not, you know, someone walking around in the woods, you know, with a machete. It is a urban based quasi giallo influenced film. Now, I find what's interesting about this movie is it's directed by Ken Hughes, who a journeyman director who did a lot of non-horror films. His biggest film is Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but he brings a clear sense of like polished filmmaking to Night School, and it's a movie that really surprised me when I watched it earlier this year on disc before it was added to Shudder. But it's well worth your time. It's got an interesting kind of twist on the killer. Very, very fun, very, very good, great looking, and actually kind of tense and somewhat scary stalk scenes. Mostly before the slasher tropes and dictates and cliches are really cemented, and it's nice to watch a slasher movie that's a little bit free from that, that's a little bit less cynical, a little bit less of a cash-in, and that's what Night School is. The next movie is something that I've talked about on the channel before, but I just can't help myself. I love 1984's The Mutilator, also known as Fall Break. The Mutilator is a really good example of something I'd call like a hangout slasher or a hangout movie, in that you have semi-likable teens, and a good amount of the movie like takes place before they're starting to be knocked off. A group of kids go to one of their friends' beach houses. It's like, oh, we'll go during quote-unquote fall break. It's not a summer set slasher, even though they are at a beach house. We'll go during fall break, but there's a pre-credit sequence where you see a little boy mistakenly have a horrible accident that leaves his mother dead, and the killer angle is the father, maybe or maybe not, taking revenge on this son and his friends. Now, this is a movie that's probably not going to be for everyone. It is a little bit more low rent. It is pretty wacky. It starts with a theme song for the movie called Fall Break, which would have made a lot more sense to audiences if they were going to see a movie called Fall Break, not going to see a movie with they changed the title to the more sensationalistic The Mutilator. By sword, by pick, by axe, by bye, one of the great taglines, and a really great fun film. Was released by Arrow Video on Blu-ray. It's a great disc, but Shudder has some kind of deal with Arrow, has some kind of distribution deal with Arrow, because a lot of the Arrow films catalog titles are on there, and this is one you should really check out if you haven't seen it. Now, all the movies we've talked about so far are standalone slashers. They're not franchises. They aren't even attempts to make a franchise. They aren't attempts to make like a kind of a Jason, a Freddy, a Chucky. They are not attempts to launch a franchise, to launch a kind of mythos. But Madman definitely is. Madman from the early 1980s, 1981, 1982. I couldn't really tell what year it actually came out. But this was released originally by Code Red, but Shudder has a very nice version of it that they've got up on their service to stream. But Madman, probably the most traditional slasher that we're going to talk about today, because it's set in the woods. It has kind of a summer campfire story set up to it. But our killer is the real kind of banner reason to watch Madman. It is Madman Mars, and he's this hulking dude in overalls who is basically a cross between a zombie and a like mountain man, grunts and groans, and he has this really cool kind of zombie makeup where he has no nose. A real standout as far as both kind of like myth making and character building for a killer. That sadly, Madman is it. This is it. This is the only starring role for Madman Mars. But it's a really, really fun movie. Really feels creepy and very much like when you think of like the platonic ideal of a slasher. Madman is one of those films. Last but not least, I wanted to switch it up. I wanted to get away from the 80s, and I wanted to talk about a movie that kind of revels in, for the lack of a better term, slasher culture. And this came out in 2006. It's called Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. And even though that was like, I'm doing the math, that was like 12 years ago. It feels kind of like it was only yesterday, but putting the movie on today, it's clearly a product of its time in many ways. And it's a movie I like a lot. I remember enjoying when Anchor Bay originally put it out on DVD. I remember back in the good old days when Best Buy actually stocked movies and would get new release movies, and these direct-to-video movies were not kind of dumped on VOD. They were actually on home video. Rise of Leslie Vernon sounds like an attempt to start a franchise, and it kind of is and it kind of isn't, but it is a faux documentary, a mockumentary, a Christopher Guest-style fake documentary where we're following a guy who, you know, he lives in the same universe, kind of, it's implied, of Springwood and Haddonfield and Crystal Lake, and he idolizes these slashers, and he thinks that he is the kind of next on the list. This guy, Leslie Vernon, he thinks that he has a cool, you know, drowned kid backstory, that he thinks he's going to be the next great slasher killer, and he has a documentary crew following him around, and they don't know to what extent to believe him, and he's like really good at magic tricks, and he has all these kind of tricks of the trade to kind of demystify how slashers pull off the things that they pull off. And if that sounds kind of meta and winking and reference-filled, it kind of is, but it's also kind of charming. I mean, you've got Robert Englund in here playing a kind of Donald Pleasance type Dr. Loomis role. You have Kane Hodder shows up for a quick like little cameo. Zelda Rubinstein. It is clearly a by horror fans, for horror fans kind of movie, but as I said, looking back on it and watching it now, there's something about it that feels like of that mid-2000s era, and something that's really kind of warm and nice about the movie, even though it does turn into, you kind of drop the documentary conceit at a certain point, and it does turn into a slasher fight for survival kind of film with the film crew. It's got a nice central performance. It's low budget, but it feels smart and well done. But Rise of Leslie Vernon, I haven't Behind the Mask, Rise of Leslie Vernon, I haven't seen it in since it came out in over a decade, but holds up. Today's book recommendation does not have anything to do with slashers, but I'm in it. It is Clickers Forever, a tribute to J.F. Gonzalez, the late, great J.F. Gonzalez. I have a story in here that takes place in Gonzalez's Clickers universe. Clickers, if you are not familiar, is a quadrilogy of novels, starting with Clickers #1, about giant killer crabs that may or may not have a like Lovecraftian bend to it. I am a big fan of the books, was very honored to be asked to contribute to this. This is the Thunderstorms very nice hardcover, but there is a soft cover and ebook available, and I think this is sold out, so you can't get it anyway. But it's edited by Brian Keene, and as of filming this, Brian Keene has just had a really bad accident and kind of needs your help. So, Stephen Kasanowski set up a GoFundMe for him. I'll put the link in the description for that. And if you could buy Mr. Keene, if you could buy Brian's books, I'm sure that would really help him out. But that's Clickers Forever. It's got a ton of amazing authors in it. I'm very lucky to have been asked to contribute, and I really like my story. I think it's a lot of fun. It's kind of Clickers meet the Jersey Shore. If you like this video, please hit like. If you really like this video, please subscribe and check out my other videos. I'm Adam Caesar. I write books. I write short stories and novels and novellas and comic books when they let me. You can find the link in the description for my mailing list. I'll send you a free novel sample and a couple free short stories if you sign up. Please buy them, review them, tell your friends about them. That's how I can keep doing this show. That's how I can keep writing. And I really appreciate it. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you next time.